babies. So today I'm going to do a lo-fi reading video for you guys. Excuse me. I burnt my lip smoking out of a glass pipe. I inhaled a piece of weed, I guess. It's whatever. But my lip's a little swollen and you can see the burnt place on it. I have a couple different places. Anyway, the book that I'm going to be reading from is Ernest Hemingway, the short stories. Okay, these stories are only like a few pages long, so that's why I said I would be reading a few. Let's see. I'm trying to see what I know Snows of Kilimanjaro, Short and Happy Life. That one's kind of long. So is the Snows of Kilimanjaro. How about Up in Michigan? That one's not too bad. Old Man at the Bridge is short, but I don't really like that one. Okay. I always turn to it anyway. Up in Michigan. Jim Gilmore came to Horton's Bay from Canada. He bought the blacksmith shop from Old Man Horton. Jim was short and dark with big mustaches and big hands. He was a good horseshoer and did not look much like a blacksmith, even with his leather apron on. He lived upstairs above the blacksmith shop and took his meals at DJ Smith's. Liz Coates worked for Smith's. Mrs. Smith, who was a very large, clean woman, said Liz Coates was the neatest girl she'd ever seen. Liz had good legs and always wore clean gingham aprons, and Jim noticed that her hair was always neat behind. He liked her face because it was so jolly, but he never thought about her. Liz liked Jim very much. She liked it the way he walked over from the shop and often went to the kitchen door to watch for him to start down the road. She liked it about his mustache. She liked it about how white his teeth were when he smiled. She liked it very much that he didn't look like a blacksmith. She liked it how much DJ Smith and Mrs. Smith liked Jim. One day she found that she liked it the way the hair was black on his arms and how white they were above the tan line when he washed up the wash basin outside the house. Like that made her feel funny. Horton's Bay, the town, was only 5 houses on the main road between Boyne County and Charlevoix. I think that's how you say that. There was a general store and post office with a high false front and maybe a wagon hitched out in front. Smith's house, Stroud's house, and Dilworth's house. Horton's house and the Van Hoosen's house. The houses were in a big grove of elm trees, and the road was very sandy. I'm sorry if you guys hear my cat meow. Like, he's right here, and he is about to get into something. There was farming country and timber each way up the road. Up the road a ways was the Methodist church, and down the road the other direction was the township school. The blacksmith shop was painted red and faced the school. A steep sandy road ran down the hill to the bay through the timber. From the Smith's back door you could look out across the woods that ran down to the lake and across the bay. It was very beautiful in the spring and summer. The bay blue and bright and usually white caps out on the lake beyond the point from the breeze blowing from the Charlevoix and Lake Michigan. From Smith's back door, Liz could see ore barges way out in the lake going toward Boyne City. When she looked at them, they didn't seem to be moving at all, but if she went in and dried some more dishes, then came out again, they would be out of sight beyond the point. All the time now, Liz was thinking about Jim Gilmore. He didn't seem to notice her much. He talked about the shop to DJ Smith and about the Republican Party and about James G. Blaine. In the evenings, he read the Toledo Blade in the Grand Rapids paper by the lamp in the front room, or went out spearing fish in the bay with the jacklight and with DJ Smith. In the fall, he and Smith and Charlie Wyman took a wagon and tent, grub, axes, and their rifles and 2 dogs, and went on a trip to the Pine Plains beyond the Vanderbilt deer hunting. Liz and Mrs. Smith were cooking for 4 days for them before they started. Liz wanted to make something special for Jim to take, but she didn't finally because she was afraid to ask Mrs. Smith for the eggs and flour, and afraid if she bought them, Mrs. Smith would catch her cooking. It would have been all right with Mrs. Smith, but Liz was afraid. All the time Jim was gone on the deer hunting trip, Liz thought about him. It was awful while he was gone. She couldn't sleep well from thinking about him, but she discovered it was fun to think about him too. If she let herself go, it was better. The night before they were to come back, she didn't sleep at all. That is, she didn't think she slept because it was all mixed up in a dream about not sleeping and really not sleeping. When she saw the wagon coming down the road, she felt weak and sort of sick inside. She couldn't wait till she saw Jim, and it seemed as though everything would be all right when he came. The wagon stopped outside under the big elm, and Mrs. Smith and Liz went out. All the men had beards, and there were 3 deer in the back of the wagon, their thin legs sticking stiff over the edge of the wagon box. Mrs. Smith kissed DJ, and he hugged her. Jim said, "Hello, Liz," and grinned. Liz hadn't known just what would happen when Jim got back, but she was sure it would be something. Nothing had happened. The men were just home. That was all. Jim pulled the burlap sacks off the deer, and Liz looked at them. One was a big buck. It was stiff and hard to lift out of the wagon. Did you shoot it, Jim?" Liz asked. "Yeah, ain't it a beauty?" Jim got it on its back to carry to the smokehouse. That night, Charlie Wyman stayed to supper at Smith's. It was too late to get back to Charlevoix. The men washed up and waited in the front room for supper. "Ain't there something left in that crock, Jimmy?" DJ Smith asked, and Jim went out to the wagon in the barn and fetched the jug of whiskey the men had taken hunting with them. It was a 4-gallon jug, and there was quite a little slopped back and forth in the bottom. Jim took a long pull on his way back to the house. It was hard to lift such a big jug up to drink out of it. Some of the whiskey ran down his shirt front. The 2 men smiled when Jim came in with the jug. DJ Smith sent out for glasses, and Liz brought them. DJ poured out 3 big shots. "Well, here's looking at you," DJ said. Charlie Wyman. "That damn big buck, Jimmy," said DJ. "Here's all the ones we missed, DJ," said Jim, and downed his liquor. "Tastes good to a man, and nothing like it this time of year for what ails you." "How about another, boys?" "Here's how, DJ." "Down the creek, boys. Here's to next year." Jim began to feel great. He loved the taste and the feel of whiskey. He was glad to be back to a comfortable bed and warm food in the shop. He had another drink. The men came into supper feeling hilarious but acting very respectable. Liz sat at the table after she put on the food and ate with the family. It was a good dinner. The men ate seriously. After supper, they went into the front room again, and Liz cleaned off with Mrs. Smith. Then Mrs. Smith went upstairs, and pretty soon Smith came out and went upstairs too. Jim and Charlie were still in the front room. Liz was sitting in the kitchen next to the stove, pretending to read a book and thinking about Jim. She didn't want to go to bed yet because she knew Jim would be coming out. She wanted to see him as he went out so she could take the way he looked up to bed with her. She was thinking about him hard, and then Jim came out. His eyes were shining, and his hair was a little rumpled. Liz looked down at her book. Jim came over back of her chair and stood there, and she could feel him breathing, and then he put his arms around her. Her breasts felt plump and firm, and the nipples were erect under his hands. Liz was terribly frightened. No one had ever touched her, but she thought, "He's come to me finally. He's really come." She held herself stiff because she was so frightened and did not know anything else to do. And then Jim held her tight against the chair and kissed her. It was such a sharp, aching, hurting feeling that she thought she couldn't stand it. She felt Jim right through the back of the chair, and she couldn't stand it. And then something clicked inside of her, and the feeling was warmer and softer. Jim held her tight, hard against the chair, and she wanted it now. Jim whispered, "Come on for a walk." A walk. Liz took her coat off the peg on the kitchen wall, and they went out the door. Jim had his arm around her. In every little way they stopped and pressed against each other, and Jim kissed her. There was no moon, and they walked ankle deep in the sandy road. That sounds terrible. Through the trees, down the dock, and the warehouse on the bay. The water was lapping in the piles, and the point was dark across the bay. It was cold, but Liz was hot all over from being with Jim. They sat down in the shelter of the warehouse, and Jim pulled Liz close to him. She was frightened. One of Jim's hands went inside her dress and stroked over her breast, and the other was in her lap. She was very frightened and didn't know how he was going to go about things, but she snuggled close to him. Then the hand that felt so big in her lap went away and was on her leg and started to move up it. "Don't, Jim," Liz said. Jim slid the hand further up. "You mustn't, Jim. You mustn't." Neither Jim nor Jim's big hand paid any attention to her. The boards were hard. Jim had her dress up and was trying to do something to her. She was frightened, but she wanted it. She had to have it, but it frightened her. "You mustn't do it, Jim. You mustn't." "I got to. I'm going to. You know we got to." "No, we haven't, Jim. We ain't got to." "Oh, it isn't right. Oh, it's so big and it hurts so." "You can't, Jim." The hemlock planks of the dock were hard and splintery and cold, and Jim was heavy on her, and he had hurt her. Liz pushed him, and she was so uncomfortable and cramped. Jim was asleep. He wouldn't move. She worked out from under him and sat up and straightened her skirt and coat and tried to do something with her hair. Jim was sleeping with his mouth a little open. Liz leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. He was still asleep. She lifted his head a little and shook it. He rolled his head over and swallowed. Liz started to cry. She walked over to the edge of the dock and looked down to the water. There was a mist coming up from the bay. She was cold and miserable, and everything felt gone. She walked back to where Jim was lying and shook him once more to make sure. She was crying. "Jim," she said. "Jim, please." Jim stirred and curled a little tighter. Liz took off her coat and leaned over and covered him with it. She tucked around him neatly and carefully. And then she walked across the dock and up the steep sandy road to go to bed. A cold mist was coming up through the woods from the bay. The end. That was kind of a sad story. I've never read that story before. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I have to. I'm about to read Cat in the Rain. I've never read this before either. Okay. Are you ready? There were only two Americans stopping at the hotel. They did not know any of the people they passed on the stairs on their way to and from their room. Their room was on the second floor facing the sea. It also faced the public garden and the War Monument. There were two big palms and green benches in the public garden. In the good weather, there was always an artist with his easel. Artists liked the way the palms grew in the... I have read this before. Artists liked the way the palms grew in the bright colors of the hotels facing the gardens and the sea. Italians came from a long way off to look up at the War Monument. It was made of bronze and glistened in the rain. It was raining. The rain dripped from the palm trees. Water stood in pools on the gravel paths. The sea broke in a long line in the rain and slipped back down the beach to come up and break again in a long line in the rain. The motor cars were gone from the square by the War Monument. Across the square in the doorway of the cafe, a waiter stood looking out at the empty square. The American wife stood at the window looking out. Outside, right under their window, a cat was crouched under one of the dripping green tables. The cat was trying to make herself so compact that she would not be dripped on. "I'm going down and get that kitty," the American wife said. "No, I'll do it," her husband offered from the bed. "No, I'll get it. The poor kitty is out trying to keep dry under a table." The husband went on reading, lying propped up with the two pillows at the foot of the bed. "Don't get wet," he said. The wife went downstairs, and the hotel owner stood up and bowed to her as she passed the office. His desk was at the far end of the office. He was an old man and very tall. "Il Piove," I think that's how you say that, the wife said. "It's Italian." She liked the hotel keeper. "It's very bad weather." He stood behind his desk in the far end of the dim room. The wife liked him. She liked the deadly serious way he received any complaints. She liked his dignity. She liked the way he wanted to serve her. She liked the way he felt about being a hotel keeper. She liked his old, heavy face and big hands. Liking him, she opened the door and looked out. It was raining harder. A man in a rubber cape was crossing the empty square to the cafe. The cat would be around to the right. Perhaps she could go along under the eaves. As she stood in the doorway, an umbrella opened behind her. It was the maid who looked after their room. "You must not get wet," she smiled, speaking Italian, of course. The hotel keeper had sent her. With the maid holding the umbrella over her, she walked along the gravel path until she was under their window. The cat table was there, washed bright green in the rain, but the cat was gone. She was suddenly disappointed. The maid looked up at her. "There was a cat," said the American girl. "A cat. Sí, il gatto." That's like the same as Spanish. "A cat," the maid laughed. "A cat in the rain?" "Yes," she said, "under the table. Then, oh, I wanted it so much. I wanted a kitty." When she talked English, the maid's face tightened. "Come, Signora," she said. "We must get back inside. You will be wet." "I suppose so," said the American girl. They went back along the gravel path and passed in the door. The maid stayed outside to close the umbrella. As the American girl passed the office, the padrone bowed from his desk. Padrone, bowed from his desk. Something felt very small and tight inside the girl. The padrone made her feel very small and at the same time really important. She had a momentary feeling of being of supreme importance. She went on up the stairs. She opened the door of the room. George was on the bed reading. "Did you get the cat?" he asked, putting the book down. It was gone. "Wonder where it went to," he said, resting his eyes from reading. She sat down on the bed. "I wanted it so much," she said. "I don't know why I wanted it so much. I wanted that poor kitty. It isn't any fun to be a poor kitty out in the rain." George was reading again. She went over and sat in front of the mirror on the dressing table and looked at herself with a hand glass. She studied her profile, first one side, then the other. Then she studied the back of her head and neck. "Don't you think it would be a good idea if I let my hair grow out?" she asked, looking at her profile again. George looked up and saw the back of her neck, clipped close like a boy's. "I like it the way it is." "I get so tired of it," she said. "I get so tired of looking like a boy." George shifted his position in the bed. He hadn't looked away from her since she started to speak. "You look pretty darn nice," he said. She laid the mirror down on the dresser and went over to the window and looked out. It was getting dark. "I want to pull my hair back and tight and smooth and make a big knot at the back that I can feel," she said. "I want to have a kitty to sit on my lap and purr when I stroke her." "Yeah," said George from the bed, "and I want to eat at a table with my own silver, and I want candles, and I want it to be spring, and I want to brush my hair out in front of a mirror, and I want a kitty, and I want some new clothes. Oh, shut up and get something to read, George said. He was reading again. His wife was looking out of the window. It was quite dark now, still raining in the palm trees. Anyway, I want a cat, she said. I want a cat. I want a cat now. If I can't have long hair or any fun, I can have a cat. George was not listening. He was reading his book. His wife looked out of the window where the light had come on in the square. Someone knocked at the door. Avanti, George said. He looked up from his book. In the doorway stood the maid. She held a big tortoiseshell cat pressed tight against her and swung down against her body. Excuse me, the padrone asked me to bring this for the signor. She got her fucking cat. Okay, that was it. That was like, I don't know, that was like 20 minutes. That was 2 stories, so I hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.